everyone, Costume Teacher here, and I'm here today to read to you Chapter 15 of Mr. Popper's Penguins, which is called Popper's Performing Penguins. Can everyone say that? Popper's Performing Penguins. When an author has words that have the same sound at the beginning in consecutive order, that means next to each other, that's called alliteration. Can everyone say that? Alliteration. Haha, it's kind of fun to say, right? Okay, there are just a couple of vocabulary words I want to make sure you are familiar with as we read the chapter. And those words are dignified. Can everyone say dignified? Dignified means formal. And our second word is rehearse. Can everyone say rehearse? Ooh, I'm familiar with that one. That means to practice for a performance. There's some people practicing right now in those pictures, and I've certainly spent some time rehearsing with many of you. Okay. All right. If you are following along with a copy of the book, this chapter begins on page 97. We are going to get through page 100 in this chapter. How cool is that? All right. Popper's Performing Penguins. At that moment, they were interrupted by the manager, who came in with a groan. Ugh. "What's the matter?" asked Mr. Greenbaum. "The marvelous Marcos who closed the program haven't shown up, and the audience are demanding their money back." "What are you going to do?" asked Mr. Greenbaum. "Give it to them, I suppose. And here it is, Saturday night, the biggest night of the week. I hate to think of losing all that money." "I have an idea," said Mrs. Popper. "Maybe you won't have to lose it. As long as it's the end of the program, why don't we just have the penguins rehearse in there on the real stage? We'd have more room, and I think the audience would enjoy it." "All right," said the manager. "Let's try it." So the penguins had their first rehearsal on a real stage. The manager stepped out on the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his hand, "with your kind indulgence, we are going to try out a little novelty number tonight. Owing to unforeseen circumstances, the marvelous Marcos are unable to appear. We're going to let you see a rehearsal of the Popper Performing Penguins instead. I thank you." In a dignified way, the Poppers and the Penguins walked out on the stage, and Mrs. Popper sat down at the piano. "Aren't you going to take off your, gloves to play?" asked the manager. "Oh, no," said Mrs. Popper. "I'm so used to playing with them that I'll keep them on, if you don't mind." Then she started Schubert's Military March. The penguins began to drill very nicely, wheeling and changing their formations with great precision, until Mrs. Popper stopped playing in the middle of the piece. The audience clapped vigorously. "There's more to it," explained Mrs. Popper, half to the manager and half to the audience, "where they form in a hollow square and march in that formation. It's so late, we'll skip that tonight and jump to the second part." "You're sure you don't want to take your, gloves off, madam?" asked the manager. Mrs. Popper smilingly shook her head and began the Merry Widow Waltz. 10 of the penguins now formed in a semicircle as Nelson and Columbus in their midst put on a wild sparring contest. That means they're fighting. Ugh. Their round black heads leaned far back so they could watch each other with both round white eyes. "Gork!" said Nelson, punching Columbus in the stomach with his right flipper and then trying to push him over with his left flipper. Okay, time out. Time out. I do not condone this part of the book where the penguins are fighting. I didn't love it when they were spanking. I don't love it now that they're fighting, but this is part of the story. This is part of the book. This is nothing that I approve of. Got it? And nobody tried today to be fighting like the penguins. Got it? All right, moving on. My flipper clear here so I can change the page. Yep, there they are. Please do not do this at home. We do not recommend this behavior, especially at school. Okay, time in. Back to the book. "Gaw!" said Columbus, going into a clinch and hanging his head over Nelson's shoulder as he tried to punch him in the back. "Hey, no fair," said the manager. The manager's onto something. Columbus and Nelson broke loose as the other 10 penguins, looking on, applauded with their flippers. Columbus now sparred politely with Nelson. At least it's politely, right? Until Nelson hit him in the eye, whereupon Columbus retreated with loud "Ork!" The other penguins began to clap, and the audience joined them. As Mrs. Popper finished the waltz, both Nelson and Columbus stopped fighting, put down their flippers, and stood still, facing each other. "Which bird won? Who's ahead?" shouted the audience. "Gawk!" said all 10 penguins in the semicircle. That must have meant "look," for Nelson turned to look at them, and Columbus immediately punched him in the stomach with one flipper and knocked him down with the other. Nelson lay there with his eyes closed. Columbus then counted 10 over the prostrate Nelson, and again the 10 other penguins applauded. "That's part of the act," explained Janie. "The other penguins all like Columbus to win, so they all say "gook" at the end. That always makes Nelson look away, so Columbus can suck him good." So it's like a choreographed wrestling match. Not that those are choreographed. Those are real. Nelson now rose to his feet, and all the penguins formed in a row and bowed to the manager. "Thank you," said the manager, bowing back. "Now comes part 3, said Mr. Popper. "Good, we're done with part 2. Bye, part 2. "Oh, Papa," said Mrs. Popper, "you forgot to bring the 2 painting step ladders and the board." "That's all right," said the manager. "I'll get the stage hands to bring in some." In no time, a pair of ladders and a board were brought in, and Mr. Popper and the children showed them how the ladders had to be set up with the board resting on top. Then Mrs. Popper began to play the pretty descriptive piece, "By the Brook." Okay, I can see the little picture there. At this point in the act, the penguins always forgot their discipline and got dreadfully excited. "Oh, that feels familiar." When at some point in the day, the penguins forgot their discipline. Why could that sound familiar? I have no idea. Okay. They would all begin shoving at once to see who could be the first to climb the ladders. However, the children had always told Mr. Popper that the act was all the funnier for all this pushing and scrambling, and Mr. Popper supposed it was. All right. Funny when penguins are pushing and shoving. Not funny when children are pushing and shoving in a line. Am I right? You're all going to the same place. Whenever you're in a line, you're all going to the same place. So now, with a great deal of squawking, the penguins fought and climbed the ladders and ran across the board in complete confusion, often knocking each other off to the floor below, and then hurrying to toboggan down the other ladder and knock off any penguins who were trying to climb up there. This part of the act was very wild and noisy in spite of Mrs. Popper's delicate music. The manager and the audience were all holding their sides laughing. At last, Mrs. Popper got to the end of the music and took off her gloves. "You'll have to get these ladders off the stage, or I'll never get these birds under control," said that's Mr. Popper. Lower my voice. "The curtain is supposed to fall at this point." So the manager gave the signal for the curtain to go down, and the audience stood up and cheered. When the ladders had been taken away, the manager had 12 ice cream cones brought in for the penguins. Then Janie and Bill began to cry. So the manager ordered several more, and everybody had one. Mr. Greenbaum was the first to congratulate the Poppers. "I don't mind telling you, Mr. Popper, that I think you've got something absolutely unique in those birds. Your act is a sensation, and the way you helped out my friend the manager here shows that you're real troopers, the kind we need in the show business. I'd like to predict that your penguins will soon be packing the biggest theaters from Oregon to Maine. And now to come to terms, Mr. Popper," he continued. "How about a 10-week contract at $5,000 a week?" "Is that all right, Mama?" asked Mr. Popper. "Yes, that's very satisfactory," answered Mrs. Popper. "Well then," said Mr. Greenbaum, "just sign these papers and be ready to open next Thursday in Seattle." "And thanks again," said the manager. "Would you mind putting on your gloves again for just a minute, Mrs. Popper? I'd like you to start playing that military march again and let the penguins parade for a minute. I want to get my ushers in here to look at those birds. It would be a lesson for them." And that is the end of chapter 15. All right. Well, I guess if penguins can get into a nice line that is marching, then you can too. You can do it. You can do it. A line for you, a line for you. All right. A line that's not fighting though, all right? Can we agree on that? Okay, well, sounds like their act got approved, and now they're about to get $5,000 a week. What is this, Publishers Clearinghouse? I mean, teachers. Did we all make a mistake? Should we have all been penguin trainers? Anyhow, nope, we shouldn't have. We're right where we're supposed to be. All right, everybody, have a great day and tune in next time for the next chapter. Hopefully with a little less fighting in it. Bye, everybody.